You hear them all the time on the news, right? Robbery, burglary, felony. These words get thrown around constantly. But do we know what they really mean, legally speaking? In this explainer, we're going to break down the essential language of crime and justice to give you a much clearer picture.
It's so easy to hear these words and just kind of nod along, assuming we get it. But the truth is, their legal definitions can be super specific. And that little gap in understanding, that's exactly what we're going to close today, so you can feel totally confident you know what's being talked about.
All right, we've got a clear roadmap for this. We'll kick things off by defining the crimes themselves. Then we'll look at how severe they are, explore why crime happens, walk through the whole justice process, and finally, wrap up with punishment and prevention.
Okay, let's dive into part 1, the language of crime. We're going to start with the absolute fundamentals, defining some of the most common crimes you probably hear about all the time. First up, we have theft. Now, you should think of theft as the big, broad umbrella term. At its very core, it's just taking something that isn't yours without permission. It's the what of the crime, the simple act of taking property.
Now here's where it gets a little more specific. Burglary is different. The key word you need to remember here is entry. Burglary is all about illegally going into a building, a house, an office, whatever, with the plan to commit a crime inside. You know, the crime doesn't even have to happen. Just the illegal entry with the intent is enough to make it burglary. It's all about the where.
And that brings us to robbery. This is where things get personal, and frankly, a lot more frightening. Robbery is still theft, but, and this is a huge but, it's done directly to a person using force, threats, or intimidation. The critical difference is the presence of a victim who's being directly threatened or hurt. This crime is all about the how. So to put it all together super simply, theft is the act, burglary is the place, robbery is the person. Of course, the list doesn't stop there. Beyond those three, we've got things like assault, which is a physical attack, fraud, which is all about tricking someone for financial gain, embezzlement, a special kind of theft done by someone you trust with your money, and then property crimes like arson and vandalism.
Okay, on to our second section, gauging severity. Because let's be real, the justice system isn't going to treat a parking ticket the same way it treats an armed robbery.
So, crimes are usually sorted into a pretty clear hierarchy. At the very top, you've got felonies. These are the most serious crimes, think robbery, and they're punishable by a year or more in prison. A step below that, you'll find misdemeanors, like a simple assault, which carry less jail time. And way down at the bottom are petty misdemeanors, which are often just non-criminal slip-ups, like a minor traffic violation.
And this really shows you the massive spectrum we're dealing with. On one end, a petty offense is basically an inconvenience that ends with a fine. But on the other end, a serious offense can completely change lives and comes with some really severe legal consequences.
This quote from Attorney General Steve Marshall really puts it into a real-world context, right? The distinction between a hardened criminal and someone who made a smaller mistake, or between violent and nonviolent crimes. Well, it has huge implications for public safety and for big legal debates like bail reform.
This leads us to a really fundamental question in our third section. Why does crime even happen? Let's take a look at some of the potential root causes.
Well, there's no single easy answer. Researchers usually point to this complex web of things that are all tangled together. Factors like poverty, unemployment, and a lack of education can create a sense of desperation. And at the same time, you have these huge systemic problems like widespread drug addiction or a justice system that maybe doesn't do a great job of rehabilitating people. It all creates a cycle that's incredibly hard to break.
And you know, this isn't a new conversation. This old newspaper quote shows that people have been talking about this for decades. Here, you see a direct line being drawn between drug abuse and the lack of treatment centers, a problem that, unfortunately, still fuels a lot of crime today.
All right, let's move into our fourth section and map out the journey a person takes through the criminal justice system. What actually happens after a crime is committed and a suspect is found?
So the process usually follows these 4 big steps. It all starts with an arrest. Someone is taken into custody. That's followed by an interrogation, where they're questioned. If charges are actually filed, the case moves on to trial to figure out if they're guilty. And finally, if there's a conviction, a sentence, the punishment, is decided.
Now, there's a really critical step that often happens between the arrest and the trial: bail. Bail is basically a sum of money paid as a guarantee that if a suspect is released, they'll show up for their court date. It's a huge and often really controversial part of the process that decides whether someone waits for their trial in jail or at home.
And that brings us perfectly to our final section, prevention and punishment. How does society respond to crime, and what does it do to try and stop it from happening again?
One of the biggest trends in punishment has been the rise of really long prison sentences. I mean, look at this chart. It's pretty staggering. It shows the number of people serving sentences over 10 years nearly tripled between 1999 and 2015. This really shows a major shift towards tougher punishments, and it's at the heart of the whole debate over what works better, punishment or rehabilitation.
But you know, prison isn't the only tool in the toolbox. The justice system has a whole range of punishments, from simple fines and probation, where someone is supervised in their community, all the way to the most severe consequences, like a life sentence or even the death penalty in some places.
And the punishment doesn't just stop when the sentence is over. A criminal record can follow a person for the rest of their life, making it incredibly difficult to get a job, find housing, or even get certain professional licenses. It's a consequence that can last for decades.
So with all that in mind, how do we stop crime before it even starts? Well, society tries a mix of different strategies. You've got proactive things like community policing and awareness campaigns, deterrence like stricter penalties, and then long-term solutions that are all about reform.
And that idea of reform is so important. Rehabilitation programs are designed to get at the root causes of why someone committed a crime in the first place. Maybe it's addiction, maybe it's a lack of job skills. The ultimate goal is to help them successfully rejoin society and hopefully break that cycle of crime for good.
So this leaves us with the million-dollar question. After understanding the language of crime, what causes it, and how we punish and prevent it, what do you think is the right balance? Is it stricter punishment, more rehabilitation, or something totally different? That, right there, is the central challenge of criminal justice. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.